Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, we are in the third chapter of the Gita. So what's happened thus far is Krishna's explained to Arjuna. Let him know that with the windows open. Yeah. Thanks so much. Krishna's explained to Arjuna thus far that he's not the body, which is a big deal. It's a big deal. It's interesting. I saw a cartoon. On, I think it was on my wife's Facebook account. I'm not sure though, I can't remember. But it said, it had like a jar of water. And in the jar of water, it had a hole in the glass jar of water, and water was leaking out of the hole. It was some kind of horrible, it's a broken jar, and the water's leaking out, and it's a disaster. And then there was a devotee, like in a dhoti with a shaved head, and he had a piece of tape on his hand. And the jar was labeled racial injustice, Black Lives Matter. And then the devotee was saying, had this piece of tape, and the piece of tape said, "You're not this body." And he slapped a piece of tape, was slapping a piece of tape on the jar. And so, the implication of the cartoon was that these out-of-touch Hare Krishna devotees, their answer to what's a real serious problem in the world that needs to be dealt with is to tell everybody, you're not this body. And it's like it's a cheap piece of philosophy that's used as a catch-all answer to whatever of life's problems you encounter. And the intention, it was made by one of our youth. So a kid was born in the Hare Krishna movement. So they're the best critics. They're like the loyal opposition. It's like a member of your party that, is critical of you. They're the best. So it was made by a devotee kid. And I appreciated so much the sentiment behind it. And I've seen people make that mistake, and I've also made that mistake. And, so many devotees have just had this real simplistic answer for all of life's problems. And you deploy it. Somebody's getting a divorce, someone's child died, someone gets cancer, and we just keep hitting people with the same sledgehammer, on the fragile china of their lives. We keep hitting it with the same sledgehammer, assuming it's just going to work. Anyway, I appreciate the sentiment. But you're not the body is a big deal. It's a big deal. It sharply relegates almost all of your existential problems to the lowest point. It's like they become almost inconsequential. In the face of eternity, the problems we have in one body in one lifetime become, for all intents and purposes, they become inconsequential. Now, if you don't believe that you're not the body, if you think that we say you're not the body, but you actually are the body, then it doesn't work. But this is a dangerous idea. It's an idea as old as time. It's an answer to some of life's most fundamental questions. And it's a game changer. I saw somebody on a YouTube video, they were in the Deep South. They were interviewing, probably Southern Baptist, Americans. And they were saying, do you believe being gay is a choice? And they would put the microphone in front of their face. And all of the rednecks would say, yes, it's a choice. And then the commentator, the interviewer, would say, because you choose to be straight, right? You're not inherently heterosexual. You made a choice. When did you choose to be straight? And you watch this look of puzzlement come over the face of every one of these Neanderthals, that exist in like a rare and ever more increasingly rare species, but they still exist in considerable numbers in certain places in the U.S. And you just watch this, they then just become vexed because they did the math and they realized, well, wait a second, I didn't choose to be straight, so then probably a gay person didn't choose to be gay. You watch the hamster wheel and their head turn, like you saw it. You saw them doing the arithmetic. It was a game changer. When you look at the way we suffer in this country and you compare it to other countries, like, are you guys familiar with what's going on in Yemen right now? Worst humanitarian crisis of this century for sure. Kind of going back, we're in the realm of like Pol Pot and his extermination of 2 million Cambodians. I mean, Yemen, in the Middle East. Kids dying every 10 minutes there. Millions of people on the brink of starvation. Actual famine. UN's run out of money. UNICEF has said these children in this country are the most endangered children on the planet. Billions of dollars required. They can't get the money together. Things that within a few weeks are going to shut down, and people are dying by the boatload. People are getting disappeared. The Saudi Arabian government's involved, and they're working with the regime that's in charge. And there's these like freedom fighters, the Houthis, and they're battling it out. And Yemen is the battleground, and people are just dying by the boatload. But beyond the hundreds of thousands of people who've died, there's millions of people who've been displaced. And those people are just on the verge of dying. And I mean, the death rates from COVID in that country are like 33%. Because everybody's so weakened and everybody's so, whoever's getting it is just, 1/3 of them are dying. It shouldn't be that, but they're so weakened and things are so bad. So the numbers are just staggering, and they're just about to explode if something doesn't happen. Do you know about this? Who knows about Yemen? You did. Yeah? It's huge. It's like Darfur Part 2. It's big. In the face of that, our problems in this world become first world problems. One of my students recently, she texts me all the time. She's like, "Hey, I realize it's just a first world problem, but I'm still struggling with this." it's not like I'm beating her up with this point, but she feels obliged to say it's a first world problem as a disclaimer, because now that she knows about what's going on around the world, she has to admit that, hey, I'm dealing with problems which in the grand scheme of things are, they're not that high on the totem pole. So you see there's these eureka moments where people realize, oh, people don't choose to be gay, or, oh, my suffering in my little bubble, there's people suffering way worse than me elsewhere. And it's hypocritical of me not to think about them. Just become myopically focused on my own stuff. There are these moments. Realizing you're not the body does that to everything. It doesn't make you less capable of acting in this world. Just like a very calm and collected boxer or a very calm and collected warrior in a fight for his life can still be in a state of flow, can still get great work done. And in fact, his dispassion or her dispassion is the fuel which allows them to act sustainably and surgically in a really productive way. People aren't productive when they're ultra attached. You're too frantic, freaked out by what's going to happen. And you're not able to be surgical. They've proven this. A certain amount of stimulation enhances your cognitive and your physical faculties. But beyond a certain point, it starts to have a really fast, precipitously deleterious effect on your functioning. It's good to be a little bit awakened, a little bit stimulated. But if you get too frazzled and freaked out and have too big of an adrenaline dump, you literally get tunnel vision. You can't actually see your periphery. And it becomes way more dangerous. The world becomes a much more dangerous place because you can't see your periphery. You're not the body forces you to be broad-minded. It forces you to think about things in a big way. It's not just a Band-Aid that you slap on like a Dutch boy putting his finger in the dike and trying to kind of stave off the flood of water, and it's like a Band-Aid on a boil. It's not actually going to work. It's not actually like that. It's a profound response. It's a profound realization. It's a game-changing realization that opens the door. It's a key. It unlocks the door to happiness, irrespective of the situation you might find yourself in. Realizing you're not the body allows you to be happy in any circumstance life throws at you. Just like if I'm playing with my 2-year-old. And, I don't know, whatever, something happens, she gets upset. It's like she's 2. She gets upset if the wind blows. She gets upset if the wind stops blowing. She gets upset if you give her a lollipop. She gets upset if you take the lollipop away. She regularly tells my wife, I don't want you. And then we say, okay, you don't have to have her. And she's like, I want you. And she's like, it's like you can't win with her. She's 2. She has very little impulse control. And even when she does demonstrate impulse control, she's a child. So she'll be super nice and sweet to you. And then she'll be horrible and horrific and awful to you 5 seconds later. And I don't care when she's nice to me. She can be so ridiculously nice. And I don't take any of that seriously. And then when she's horrifically mean to me, I don't take that seriously either because she's 2. And therefore, her just wildly vacillating display of emotions is just not that consequential. I've raised 5 other children. I get the terrible 2s. I've never had them worse with a kid than with my daughter. She's as spoiled as all of my other kids put together. But whatever, it's my karma. I wasn't ready for it earlier on in life, so Krishna hit me with it later on in life. And I'm a little more zen about it, and every day is like, I hate you, I love you, go away, come here, I don't want you, I need you. And it's just like, she's all over the map. And she's 2, and I don't take any of it seriously, and she doesn't frazzle me. And so I can be a good parent. Because I got a broad mind to look at things. Our relationship with this world, to a large extent, is as if I was to take my 2-year-old like the most serious thing in the world. Take your 2-year-old seriously, that's fine. But her wildly vacillating display of emotions, that's not good to take so seriously. I had a friend. My friend got divorced. I'm a Hare Krishna. I don't really believe in divorce. Push came to shove, and somebody was beating their spouse, or was severely addicted to drugs, or was really cheating on them. Then I start to feel like, geez, maybe you do deserve out. But most of the time, I don't believe in divorce. I'm all in favor of people making a commitment and keeping it. People having the basic human decency to give their word and then keep their word. I had a friend who was getting divorced, and I was, trying to persuade him to stick it out. He made a point to me that really stopped me in my tracks. He said, my wife is treating me so horribly and abusively. And if my kids see me take that kind of abuse, they're going to learn it's normal. So at least when my kids grow up, I can teach them the lesson that at a certain point, you shouldn't have to stand for that anymore. Now, whether or not my friend was justified in his particular circumstance or not is sort of irrelevant for the purpose of this conversation. But I found it to be a compelling argument. Detachment does have its place. If you get too attached to your body, to the bodies of other people, you go down with the Titanic. The cross that the spiritualist has to carry is that there's something bigger going on. Something bigger than feeding starving children. Something bigger than equal rights. Something bigger than anything. We get real nasty. Something bigger than ending human trafficking. Human trafficking, there's 2 million sex slaves in the world. There's more like 20 or 30 million, human beings that are trafficked and held against their will and are living in some form of what is slavery in this world today. There's somewhere between 100,000 and 500,000 actual slaves in Mauritania right now today. Actual slaves who've been enslaved for as long as their forefathers can remember. Haratins that are owned by the Berbers and have been for thousands of years. At least 1,500. There's something more important than that. Self-realization for the spiritualist is the most important thing, because it's what stays with you forever. You know, if we're looking at the longer something lasts, the more real it is. The more temporary it is, the less substantial it is. Some people go for tattoo removal. They use lasers to remove tattoos. It's painful. It's like having somebody burn you. But it just lasts for a second. You take that same pain and let's say you increase it and you make it last for a year. That's going to kill people. You take this building's here, it's real, but it's going to be gone in 100 years. Be replaced by another building. But the rules of physics that allow this building to exist, the rules of classical mechanics, those rules are true everywhere for all time. Those rules are more real. But those rules aren't true underwater. Those rules aren't true in outer space. And so although they may be true for all time on the surface of the earth, they're not necessarily true for all time everywhere in the universe. So even those rules of classical mechanics, on a quantum level, they don't hold. And as you go out into space, they get stretched in various directions. What is it that's always true? What is it that never leaves you? What is it about this universe that you can always count on, that you can always anchor yourself to? It's certainly not people. They're going to be gone in 5 minutes. People have various answers to this, your integrity, your honor. People have so many answers to this question. But for a spiritualist, the answer is that the soul and God, they exist forever. That relationship is the most important. All relationships in this world should support that. It may look a million different ways. You might meet somebody who's very strict in their spiritual life and they marry somebody who's an atheist. I could never marry an atheist. How could I be close to somebody who I didn't share the most intimate part of myself with? How could I do that? Couldn't do it. But I know devotees, friends of mine, deep spiritualists, maybe better spiritualists than I am, they're married to an atheist. And you talk to them about it, and our relationship is on this level, and my spiritual life's over here, and they facilitate. We have a nice material life together, but this is my own thing over here. So it can manifest differently. Some people could never marry someone who wasn't from their tribe. Other people could marry somebody from a completely different tribe. How it manifests is of less concern to me. You can justify both positions. Just like my friend could justify leaving, you could also justify staying in that painful relationship. Just an example of tolerance and forbearance and working through stuff. There's a million ways you could have taken it. I'm not so much thinking that there's only one way to interpret the principle. But if your spiritual life, if God exists, if the soul exists, then that relationship is the most important. That may be reflected in how you operate in this world. It may cause you to be more diligent. Like I said, a serious spiritualist is a real tactician. They can move in this world and get amazing stuff done because they're not as spun out by their own biases and their own appetites. They can really walk that razor's edge of Dharma and do the right thing. They can let go when they need to. They can hold on when they need to. They can know the difference between the two. But this world gets just a lot less myopic, a lot less immediate, a lot less essential, a lot less heartbreaking. You can navigate old age, disease, and death. You can even look at suffering and make some sense out of it and still believe in an all-good and all-powerful God who's not just impotent up there and can't do anything, who's not evil up there and dystheistic and doesn't want to do anything. You can hold it and you can see it and you can operate. Krishna hit Arjuna with that. You're not the body. It's mega. It's big. It is the biggest concept in the world. From you're not the body, you get the idea. You also, through natural theology, get to the existence of an eternal deity, and now you've got everything. You got the soul and God in perpetuity. What's the suffering of a lifetime? It's like you got to objectify people to really exploit them. If you're trying to go and seduce somebody for like a one-night stand or for a con, which is essentially what a one-night stand is, for some kind of con, you want to con somebody, take advantage of them, and then you realize that person has a family, and that person has siblings who love them, and that person has a history, and they got a story, and they got like hopes and dreams, and they got values. You follow? You can't con them anymore. Your conscience will stop you. The golden rule kicks into effect, and you have to do unto others as you want done unto yourself. You can't exploit them. It doesn't work anymore. You got to sort of keep the lights down and keep the beer goggles on and like not do the math and not think it through in order to be able to take advantage of people. Maybe rattle off in your own head some stupid mantra, kind of keep yourself going, and keep yourself, that this is, I'm just taking care of my own, or I'm taking care of what I need, or something like that. You can find somebody to justify it or rationalize it in like a sort of a partial way. But when you see it, when you see somebody, and you realize they're a person just like you, then exploitation goes out the window. You can't do it anymore. When you see you're not the body, your whole exploitative relationship with the entire material world undergoes a eureka transformation, just like what I saw happening with those rednecks when they realized that gay people didn't choose to be gay. You follow? It's step one. It's always step one. It's also step 100. It's the foundation of a spiritual life. It's the beginning of everything. It's that foundation that you can build the house the whole world can live in on. It also ends exploitation. It solves all the problems that all the isms of our world are trying to solve. And it allows you to be a surgical agent of truth. It allows you to act very purposefully and really powerfully in this world, in whatever circumstance you find yourself. But it's an interesting paradox in that your very ability to act in a powerful way and be able to do amazing things in this world, to some extent, depends on letting go of your ridiculous attachment to the comings and goings of this world. Just like to be an effective parent means to some extent you have to not take your vacillating emotions of your 2-year-old that seriously. Any parent, any newbie parent who has no idea what's going on and gets all spun out, I see it all the time. Just dumb, stupid, young parents have no clue what's going on. Just helicoptering over the kids, they just don't get it. They have no zen. And their kids get these sort of like delusions of grandeur because their parents feed into this ridiculous notion of the center of the universe. If you really want to love your kids, and then of course you get people who hate kids and treat them horribly. And so Zen doesn't mean neglect. You follow? Those two things aren't the same. Just like humility and low self-esteem aren't the same thing, being Zen and detached and hating kids, those aren't the same thing. Being a neglectful parent isn't the same as being a detached parent. But if you want to really be a good parent for your kid, part of that is you don't take them so seriously. Because you know they're all over the map. And you see the bigger picture. My daughter literally, every day of her life for the last few weeks, says to my wife, I don't want you. And my wife goes, okay, and puts it down, and that goes about her business. And she goes, I want you. And she goes, okay. She picks it back up again. Two-year-olds have borderline personality disorder. It's a lack of impulse control. It's just the classic symptom of borderline. If you want to distinguish between histrionic personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality, the big cluster Bs, the critical feature of borderline personality disorder are these wildly simultaneous opposite emotions. I hate you, don't leave me, is a classic book on the topic. That's my daughter. She's 2. The therapy for borderline personality disorder, in addition to drugs, which I don't think are actually so effective, right? No. The actual therapy is you have to teach people not to take themselves so seriously. Like, I know you think this way, but it's not actually that important. I know you think this way too. You have to teach people to not take themselves so seriously. Well, we all need to learn that lesson that my 2-year-old needs to learn. All of us need to learn that lesson. And the medicine of that is you're not the body. And it doesn't stop you and make you callous. It doesn't make you inactive. It actually makes you able to know how to help people in the best of all possible ways. You don't just give somebody a fish or a mango. You teach them how to farm mangoes so they can always have a mango. You can help people be happy in any circumstance. It's funny, it's like, well, how do you know what it's like to live in a concentration camp? How do you know what it's like to live in Yemen right now? How do you know what it's like to be a black man, a black woman, a black trans woman in the US of A, in this time and place, suffer that kind of violence and bigotry as part of your daily fare? You have to give that to your children. You have to prepare them for that. It's an interesting thing about this world is that all of us have to die, which means suffering so much that you actually leave your body. Everyone has to become a sannyasi. Everyone has to suffer in like a tremendous, hellish pain. Because we all got a date with death. And before death rolls in, we get to enjoy some old age. A friend of mine, he's in his early 70s, he just fell down. I was totally freaked out. He called me up, he fell down. I was like, oh my God, did you break your hip? Did you break your leg? A wipeout in your 70s, sometimes you're limping the rest of your life. You can't even walk the rest of your life. It's not a small thing. Your bones get all brittle. A flu in your 60s and 70s can be a death sentence. We can't possibly know the suffering of another group of people because we can only know our own. But disease and death, old age, these are universal teachers. Usually you get some betrayal, some heartbreak along the way. But all of us get to take a master's class in old age, disease, and death. You follow? Simply by showing up here, we all get that. And of course, people can say, well, I'd rather die than live the way I do. But it's not exactly true. Because if somebody would rather die than live the life they were living, what would they do? They kill themselves. So the very fact you're still kicking, and still fighting, and still breathing, and still trying, means that what you're dealing with right now is better than death. But all of us get to actually enjoy death at some point. In a lot of ways, this lifetime is a training ground for that moment. And that's not unreasonable. You could imagine if, let's say we all knew that we were going to be hanging out here and doing our thing, but then at a certain point, at the stroke of midnight, a bunch of armed thugs were going to come in the building. You guys know the word thug? You know where it comes from? Tug. The Tuggies were a group of brigands that flourished in India over the last 1,000 years. And they would attack travelers. Traveling used to be dangerous because you had to walk from point A to point B. This is like in the Wild Wild West. They'd always attack the stagecoach or the train because they had to travel through nowhere, and there was no law, there was no defense easily available there. You weren't living in a fortress or a place where there was police and where you couldn't escape. You're out in the middle of nowhere. So the Tuggies were a cult of Kali worshipping, homicidal criminals. And their program was they would just kind of be on the side of the road, and you'd meet them, and they'd be like, "Hey, are you going that? I'm going that way too," like almost like a hitchhiker. "Let's go together." And then 20 miles down the road, you meet another guy, and pretty soon you got a nice little crew, and that's helpful because it's dangerous to travel alone. So you got 4 or 5 people you're traveling with, but all of a sudden now you're like 9 or 10 people, but they're all part of the same group. Those 4 or 5 guys you met. And then when it was nighttime, you went to sleep. You're all standing watch, watching each other. And when it was their time to stand watch, their buddies would come out of the trees and they'd strangle you to death, bury you in a mass grave, and steal all your stuff. They just disappeared people all over India. The British government finally got involved and got rid of them. But if you read the Chaitanya Charitamrita or any medieval classic Indic literature, you find these groups. They're there. They were a regular feature of society. Anyway, so just like pajamas and all sorts of other words in the English language, the word thug comes from tuggy. Okay, anyway, a bunch of armed thugs are going to come in the building at midnight. What do? Do you just pretend it's not going to happen? No, you prep for it. What if you get a nice house given to you? This is actually a more apropos example. You get a nice house given to you, and you get to live there for 5 years. But then you have to leave. On that day, you have to leave, and you don't get to take anything with you. What would you do? Would you just hang out there and pretend it was never going to happen and wait for the sheriffs to show up and evict you? Would you wait for that? No, of course not. When I was 15, I was living on my own. We got evicted. So actually, I know what it's like to get evicted. Sheriffs come in. It's the whole thing. They have a paper, and you have to leave like right there on the spot. They'll give you like 5, 10 minutes, half an hour to grab your stuff, but they're on the clock. You're done. And so you got to get your stuff moved out beforehand. We knew this. We waited it out. We moved all our stuff out. We just waited for them to show up and had breakfast and then split. But you don't just wait. You prep. You get ready. Even at the age of 15, I knew this. Even at the age of 15, when we got served the eviction notice and we had to go through it and like figure it out. I wasn't living with my parents at this time. I was living on my own with some friends. And even at that age, I knew, okay, we were like marking on the calendar, counting down the days until it was up. And we found another place to live and moved all our stuff over there and, and figured the whole thing out. So imagine if you got a place to live for 5 years or 50 years or 75 years. But at a certain point, you had to leave. You would start to think about, where am I going to go? What's next? What's my next move? Once you realize you're not the body, you start to look at this world in a different way. It's a moment in time. It's part of the journey. It's not everything. And you got one foot in the door, but you got one foot out the door as well. This is a huge lesson. It's a big lesson. It's a valuable lesson. It's as valuable today as it ever was. It will always remain valuable. It's incredibly powerful. And it's helped me so much personally in my life to navigate the difficulties I've gone through. And all of us get to have a date with death. And that's the big one. And people can say, no, this is much worse. No, it's not. You follow? Like, how do you know your suffering's worse than death? You kill yourself. There's a real elegant and macabre display of this in 2001 on September 11th, on Madhu's birthday. The Twin Towers were melting, the fires were raging, and people started jumping out the windows, 75 stories up. 75 stories up is 750 feet up. It's insane. You know? It's like the worst thing ever. There's no hope. There's no chance. Nobody made it. Nobody bounced and rolled and studied parkour and figured it out. That's like 4 or 5 stories up. You know what I mean? Nobody made it. But obviously, they were suffering so much, getting burned to death in that building, right then in that moment, where they had to go, I'll do anything to get away from this. They were being cooked alive. And so they jumped. We're all going to have to cross that bridge and leave this body behind and shed this mortal coil and let go of everything, because staying here becomes absolutely untenable. Prabhupada made the point, he says, death is when living in your body becomes so painful that you let go. Having watched people die, I've seen it happen. Where people are holding on, they're fighting, and it just gets to be too much, and you see them just let go. We all get to have a date with that. And in a lot of ways, our life is preparatory for that. Not in a paranoid or delusional or death fetish kind of way, but just dispassionate looking at the nature of this world and our time here and catching a little bit of Zen and taking that road less traveled and living a life of self-realization, not sense gratification. Choosing the higher road. Being deep, having real integrity. I'm unashamed of my pursuit of Krishna consciousness. I'm unwilling to say it's less important than anything. It's the greatest gift to the world. It's the best thing you can do for yourself. It's the best thing you can do for other people. There is no ism that supersedes it. Nothing is more important. Nothing ever has been more important. Nothing ever will be more important. It's the panacea. It's the touchstone. It cures everything. It's the elixir of immortality. It gives profound meaning and joy to life in a way that time cannot touch. Nothing else in the world has that potential even. What to speak of actually accomplishing it? Nothing besides spiritual life even has the potential theoretically of delivering on that level. Arjuna couldn't deal with it. It was too much information for him. The ramifications of it was too much for him. So then Krishna told Arjuna, fine, then just do your duty, be connected to some kind of regulation, something above yourself, follow some of the rules of our sacred texts, but do so in a lusty, greedy kind of way. And eventually, because you're connected to some kind of higher tradition, the words of that tradition will sink in. They'll sink in. Almost like for an AA meeting. If you go to an AA meeting and you're drunk, they'll say, go away. Can't be here. If you call your sponsor and you're drunk, he'll say, won't talk to you. Call me when you're sober. Because there's just no utility in it. But you could imagine if you were getting drunk at an AA meeting, and while you're drinking, you're being forced to listen to people tell you not to drink. If you're not deaf and you don't leave, at a certain point, their words and their stories are going to start to bug you, and they're going to start to make you pensive and thoughtful, and you're going to reflect on your own life, and you realize there's some truth to what they're saying, and it's going to result in you giving up drinking. So Krishna says, you can't give up your materialism? Fine, just jump in the mix with us and do some spiritual stuff. And you'll eventually realize. Then when you become awakened, self-realized, to some extent your responsibilities in this world start to slacken and you can start to really embrace transcendence. Like a monk or something like that. But to set an example for other people, you stay in it. Now it's not just for you. You might have been cured. But to help other people be cured, you stay in the game. And then you got to be careful. You don't give people too much, because if you give them too much, they'll hate you for it. You give them too much. You'll get that cartoon made about you if you try and beat the drum too much. You don't beat enough, nobody goes anywhere. Everybody stays where they are. If you don't say anything and give people self-realization, then they just stay materialists and you're just hanging out with a bunch of people and you're being just like them and there's no value in your association. On the other hand, if you give them too much, it's too much for them to take, like it was too much for Arjuna, and they end up rejecting you, and then they're also bereft. And so for that advanced spiritualist, they have to surgically involve themselves in the world in a way which gradually uplifts people, has that seed of transcendence, but not so much that people can't wrap their heads around it and start to move with it. And the essence of that is realizing that karma is rolling through this world and people are getting what they deserve and you can't control it. You're not the doer. There's so much in life that we can't control. And so instead of trying to focus on the things we can't control, we should focus on the things we can control. I mean, anyway, genetics teaches us this. In a lot of ways, genetics is like really congruent with and compatible with the idea of karma. But we're not born in this world a blank slate, a tabula rasa, like some philosophers claim. We're born in this world with a whole bunch of genes that determine so much of who we are. 50% of depression, especially the severe types, is caused by your genes. You have no control over it. So much of it is controlled early on in life. You also have no control over it, like the remaining 20% more. So much of what causes serious stuff to happen to people may be something they're born with. They have no control over. Of course, Down syndrome, congenital heart defects. There's so many things that exist in this world that you have absolutely no control over. And so we shouldn't put our effort focusing on that. We should put our effort into focusing on what we can control. And one thing we can control is whether we let this world spin us out or whether we surgically involve ourselves in this world in a way that allows us to move forward spiritually as well as materially, where we don't have to sacrifice the thing which matters the most to serve the thing which matters the least. Let me say that again. The big choice we have is whether we want to live our lives sacrificing the thing which matters the most in service of the thing which matters the least. So we want to spend our whole life running after sense gratification, running after material enjoyment, running after youth. If you do that, guaranteed you're going to come up goose eggs. You're going to come up a loser. You're going to bet on the losing horse. Spirituality means, no, I'm not going to bet on that. I'm going to let go of some of that. I'm going to focus on something real, something permanent, something forever. And then Krishna has this really radical idea. What verse are we on?
We covered 28 last week.
That's it?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Bewildered by the modes of nature, we're on text 29. Bewildered by the modes of nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activities. Bewildered by the modes of nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activities. And they become attached. But the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to the performer's lack of knowledge. So people are bewildered. They think they're this body. They think this world's all there is. They get hopelessly attached to it. They become totally enmeshed in the comings and goings of this world. And this ism and that ism. And the wise spiritualist should not unsettle them, even though you can see that that's not going to lead people to where they need to go. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims for proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. This verse, in a lot of ways, is a summation of the entire Gita. Krishna doesn't just wait till the 18th chapter to give us his final thought. He does it in every chapter. This is that in the 3rd chapter. It's heavily theistic. Before Krishna's even really introduced God, he made a slight homage to the deity in the 2nd chapter when he said, Yukta Sita Matparaha. Sit, yoga, with me as your highest object. Here he goes bigger. Mayi sarvani karmani. Unto me all acts. Sannyasya, adhyatma cetasa. Thinking of spiritual things, give them to me. Renounce all things to me. Give all your action to me. Do everything for me. It's bhakti. It's theism. In the context of, well, what do you do? If you're not attached to this world, then what do? You act in this world as a service to God. Vigata dwara. Give up your fever. With your fever gone. It's kind of apropos given the current pandemic. Jwara means fever. Vigata jwara. With your fever gone. Yujasva. Fight. You must fight. You should fight. The fever is the fever of delusion, thinking everything depends on you and you're in charge of everything. You give that up, and then you go back and fight. I don't know if you guys are noticing, but Krishna here is saying the same thing I tried to say the whole class. I hope you guys made that connection. I wasn't just rambling and ranting, but there was a method to the madness. We're now looking at the verses, hopefully having discussed these principles, their wisdom should be easy to understand. Surrendering all your works to me, with full knowledge of me, without desire for profit, near Ashi, with no claims for proprietorship, near Mama, not mine, near Mama, not mine. Fight. Still fight. But without the materialism and the selfishness and the attachment. Do your duty. Be active. But not in a way that degrades you. In a way that allows you to surgically interface with the world. Those persons who execute their duties, so they're working. We're doing stuff. We're making moves in this world. According to my injunctions. And who follow this teaching faithfully of being in this world but not of it. Of doing your duty but not being attached to the results. Of doing your duty because it should be done for the pleasure of God but not for yourself. People who do that without envy, they become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. They live in this world, and by acting in this world, they become free from this world. It's a miracle. They find a tree, they cut off a branch, they make an axe handle, they fasten the right blade, the blade of knowledge, and they cut down the very tree that gave them the axe. They work in this world, and through working in this world, they become detached and transcendental. But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them, they're to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. It always sounds a little Christian to me, verses like this. But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them regularly are to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. The thing is, Krishna's not like smiting you or smoting you or damning you. He's just pointing out, if you don't understand the rules of the game, you're going to fail. Like if you understand you're supposed to dribble the ball when you play basketball, you're going to get called for traveling all the time, and you're never going to win. In Dagestan, they play basketball without dribbling the ball. It's like a bunch of aggro, violent wrestlers, and they play basketball, but there's no dribbling. So they grab the ball, and they don't really call you for checking and being too physical on the court. So anyway, you watch these Dagestanis play basketball, it's like the most funny thing ever. It's a bunch of people wrestling with a ball and then occasionally throwing it at the hoop. If you don't know the rules, then you don't play the game, you don't get successful. If you don't realize you're not the body, if you don't understand the truth of this, then you live as a miser, as a materialist, and you end up suffering at the end of your life, or even during your life, because you're hopelessly attached and you don't get the bigger picture. Like a person who, like the prodigal son, who left and just made a fool of himself and wasted everything. Until you come home, you haven't learned your lesson. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. There's a way you can live in this world and enjoy this world without becoming hopelessly enmeshed in it. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they're stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. We want people to enjoy. We want people to get married, have families, have sex, have children, become successful, make money, buy homes, fight for equal rights, make the world a better place, uplift humanity, but not do so in a way that blinds them to the ultimate conversation that we should be having every day about who am I and why am I here and what's purposeful, what's the purpose of life. And so you got to learn to live in this world without being of it. And so this is what Krishna's taught so far. And then he says this one, and we'll finish with this. He says it's far better to do your own prescribed duties, even though you do them faultily, than to do another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing your own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. To just whimsically change what you do based on the changing tides is dangerous. You got to figure out who you are, what you're made of, what you're supposed to do, and you got to learn to have some fortitude and some commitment and stick to that. And by doing that, are we done?
20 seconds.
20 seconds. By doing that, you can really make a move in this world. You can really do something. And obviously, this has to be troubleshot, that last verse. And so thank you, Instagram. We're going to finish things up on Facebook. because we're old school. Hare Krishna.